Hi everybody, this is Cheyenne from Ruby Easel Studio, and today I'm going to teach you how to use the bubble technique from my Foundations of Watercolor course to make a Christmas ornament, Christmas card, or picture, or whatever you like it to be. So the first thing you're going to need is a round brush. I'm using a Ranger number 4 round brush. It's not very big at all. Doesn't have to be fancy either. This is one that I used the other day to do the same thing, and it's from a kid's set. Okay, it just has to be a round brush. The second thing I'm using is my watercolor paper. This is 140 pounds. And it's important that it's thicker. You're going to want thicker paper. The best watercolor paper is 100% cotton, blah blah blah, non-acidic. I really don't think that's necessary, especially if you're just practicing or just doing something cute. If you're doing a gallery level or something, get your 100% cotton paper for sure, but I mean, for every day you don't really need it. The other thing I'm using is my Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors set. This is my travel set. You may have seen me around Mackenzie painting with it in the field. I do a lot of on plein air work. These are really good, like, budget sort of friendly watercolor without being too cheap. These are nice and creamy. I really love how they apply to the paper. But you can do this project with any old watercolors. It doesn't have to be nice, creamy, in a professional pan that you have to unwrap. You can literally use those cheap Crayola round in a little tin watercolors that you give kids in their stockings for Christmas, right, to make this. You can do this on Christmas Day with your new watercolors out of your stocking. You don't have to have it be all fancy like I'm doing. Okay, so the other thing you're going to need is something round. I'm using this. It's a scented candle I got from our local bargain store, and I really like how it has a flat edge, so I've actually been using it for a lot of different bubble technique projects. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to prepare one color. Now when you have pan dried watercolors like this, what you need to do is wet them. You need to wet them before you start painting. Now if I was using more than one color, I would use my spray bottle and spray the entire palette, but I'm not using more than one. I'm just showing you how this is done. So I'm just going to wet just the red, and that when I wet just the red and just use the red, that makes all of these last longer. If you wet your watercolors too often, they can start to mold. So if you're not going to use the whole palette, just wet the colors that you want to use. And that's a good budget tip. So what I'm going to do is I've got very wet. See how it's very wet? I'm spreading that very wet, thick level of paint on the edge of the glass. I like this glass because it's so flat along the edge. It makes it really easy to get the paint on there just perfect. And it leaves a good impression on the paper, which makes it easier for me to do this. So now I'm going to turn this over, and I want my ornament like down here. So push it down, and pull up. And that left me a good impression. So now I'm taking my brush and I'm cleaning it off. Okay, doesn't have to be entirely, but it should be very clean. So I'm taking my brush. Now this paper is dry. There are other techniques where you want to have your paper wet first, but for this technique you want dry paper and wet brush. Now it's important that it be wet brush, because otherwise you're doing a dry brush technique, which is a totally different thing. So I am now going along that circle, I'm making sure to touch the watercolor that I left on the paper with the water. You'll see that it is spreading, and that is the nature of watercolor. It will spread when you add more water. Even if it dries, you can always reactivate your watercolor with water. Who'd have thunk? And you can always make changes, which is something I really enjoy. It's a lot more calming than a permanent gallery level acrylic canvas, you know? Now I'm going to wet the middle a little more. And there will be a minute or two where the water doesn't quite sink in all the way, and all of a sudden the paper is going to grab it and it's going to wick it in. And that's why watercolor paper is special. Now see, I've wetted this and I don't feel like it's quite dark enough, so I'm going to add some more. And when I add watercolor, prepared watercolor to wet, look what it does. It just feathers out. You can push it with your brush, or you can drop it in and it will spread as far as the paper is wet. I like how it's spreading it, looking very round. Adding some more up here. I quite like that. And now, the next step is to let this dry. You want to let this completely dry. Now I have already prepared another ornament, so I'm making two, but the magic of TV, so I can show you what the next step will be. Now I'm taking my glass, and you'll see there's still watercolor from the last circle that I did on the glass. So I'm going to take just some tissue with just some water on it, and I'm wiping the edge of the glass clean. And that's because I went to the trouble of letting this dry, so I don't want to reactivate what was on the glass and wreck my effect. Because the next thing I'm going to do is use these, I still feel so spoiled getting these metallic watercolor gouache. I was gifted recently. There's gold and there's silver, and now these are very expensive colors to get in gouache and watercolor, so I feel quite spoiled. At least they are in Canada. So I think I'm going to use gold, and the first thing I'm going to do is pick one of the little pats of gold and activate it. Ooh, I can already see some of the sparkles on the brush. So now I'm just going to try to load up here. I believe they make this with all natural mica powder. It's what it said on the carton. So I've loaded my brush. Boy, does it ever look sparkly. Now at the top of this, I'm going to draw with my brush, not with a pencil or anything, the top of my ornament. Ooh, I quite like that. It's very sparkly. I don't know if you can see it so well in the camera. It's very, very sparkly. darken it a little, so I'm going to need some more. I'm going to darken that. And it's still not really standing out like I want it to. I think this gold is a little more translucent than I was expecting. So what I'm going to do to fix that is use a little bit of my yellow. I'm just wetting the yellow. I'm going to use a little yellow and add it in. And it's mixing with the gold that was already on the card. And the whole thing is going shimmery, but you can it stands out better. I quite like that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add embellishment to the outside of the ornament. I'm going to outline it. Well, sort of outline it with gold. And so what I'm doing is I'm getting my gold very wet and very activated. I'm mixing it up real good. And I'm adding a little more water. Get it nice and wet. And then applying it to the edge of the same glass that I used to make the ornament. Now you can also do this with wet gold gouache, like already wet from the tube, not dried and reactivated, but it does use quite a lot of paint when you use it straight from the tube. And I'm always trying to economize because paint's expensive. So this is how I do it. Okay, now that I've painted that pretty, oh, I wish it would stay that way forever. It's so pretty. I turn it over, line it up with the edges, and press. Pull it up, and sadly it doesn't stand out as well as I would like it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some yellow to this too. Add some yellow, and then I'm going to add more gold so that the gold's on top of the yellow. That'll help it stand out. And then gold, just gold. I see how I cleaned my brush before I went again at the gold. Oh my goodness. Okay, now I'm adding gold to the yellow. Now if you're watching this from someplace that isn't Mackenzie, BC, please drop me a comment and let me know where you're watching it from. I always find it very interesting. There, I quite like that. I don't know if you can see it in the video so much. It's an outline, just a shimmery outline around the edges. So metallic that it's hard to see in the camera. I hope I'm showing you what I mean. So then what I'm gonna do is I was going to use gold, but it doesn't really stand out very well, so I think I'm going to use a little black and just paint the string that my ornament is hanging from. And that's it. That's how you paint an ornament. I've gotten a little fancy with putting the gold around the edge and everything. You don't have to put the gold around the edge. You can add evergreen leaves, boughs, so that it's hanging from an evergreen bough. You can add the Grinch's hand sticking out from the side and holding on to it for a really popular contemporary piece. Or you can just do this, right? And just put on the back, Merry Christmas from, right? Stick it in an envelope, that's your Christmas card. I just really think it's a great, neat little project that anybody can do. And it teaches you the bubble technique, which is a really important thing to learn if you're going to try to learn watercolor. So that's Cheyenne from Ruby Studio, and I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Merry Christmas!